Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and this is another rapid fire review. A review format on this channel where I try to get a review done in 10 minutes or less, although that hasn't quite happened yet. In any case, today's rapid fire review is going to be Tanares Expeditions Central Sea. This is the newest version of the Tanares ecosystem from Dragori Games. This is a prototype, all rules and components subject to change, and I'll have a link to the crowdfunding campaign down below. I'm going to give you a general overview of how the game plays, and then of course my thoughts, timestamps to everything down below. Tanares Expeditions aims to be a shorter, more accessible version of Tanares, very much built on the bones, on the rule set that Tanares Adventures already has in play, but giving you a more accessible in terms of the price point, more accessible in terms of the table, the table space, the setup time, the accessibility and ease of tabling, and then as well as the actual game time itself, giving you kind of a single expedition to go on as opposed to this overarching grand adventure. But other than that, it's very much built on the framework that Tanares Adventures has, which means if you are familiar with Tanares Adventures already, this will feel very, very, very familiar. Most of the rules, as far as the combat and interactions, are going to be very similar, although dialed down in terms of the degree of the health pool, effectively. Things that might have done 5 damage before, deal 3 damage now. Things that might have been a range of 8, now only have a range of 5. So everything's scaled down a bit, which will make the overall rules very accessible if you're familiar with Tanares, but some of those interactions you might have to remember that it's now 5 instead of 8, 3 instead of 5, things like that as you play. But the general idea is this is going to be a roguelite dungeon crawler, because as much as the interactions and rules are similar, the overall arc of what you're doing is different, and there are a lot of differences here at play that might make this game better or worse for you than Tanares Adventures, or if you haven't played Tanares Adventures, possibly a good starting point to the series. You see, you are going to be going through this kind of dungeon crawler-esque game board over here, but it's given to you in terms of these expeditions that you're going on. You're going to go on an expedition, on these quests more specifically. You have these quests that you're going on that will take place across a variety of encounters. In each of the encounters, you're going to be leveling up across each encounter, giving you that roguelike feeling. So for example, right now in this prototype over here, we have the quest of Blink Island. You're going to have the setup rules over here, you'll have your little quest card that you have, and then you're going to have the starting encounter, which represents the few people you've drawn and set up. This is meant to be somewhat randomly generated, so you have a specific pool of enemies you could be pulling from, but then you'll randomly pull from that, which means every time you play the game, there will be a slight differences to it. The overall arc will be the same, but the enemies you're facing might be a different mix and match and therefore a different puzzle. So you're going to have your encounter. In this case, we have these 3 enemies set up over here, and then our little pool of heroes have to take those down using all the tools at their disposal, which we'll come back to shortly. Once you're done with the encounter, that's little encounter 1 over here, you're going to read a little bit of flavor text or whatnot, the story going on, and then set up encounter 2, which will take place on the same board. As you go through that, you'll also have encounter 3, and then you'll possibly flip to this other side over here, assuming you make it that far, and then continue to set up the encounter on this board. Now, I don't know the overall arc, whether they're all going to take place across 2 maps or 3 maps or 1 map. I don't know the arc as far as the various quests. The prototype of quest I have has an encounter with multiple parts, I believe it's 5 parts, set up across those 2 boards, and each part has you defeating various villains before you make your way to the boss, at which point you have leveled yourself up through the use of improvement cards. Again, some of these things will be familiar, some different, depending on if you've played Tanares, or for that matter, any dungeon crawler. The goal of the game as far as your characters go, as far as how your characters operate, characters come into play with their general stats over here, their passive abilities that take place. Each character type has their own passive ability. You need to have one of each of the character types, so once you have a variety of characters, you can pick and choose one from each class. So we have one healer over here, and you can pick and choose your healer. Then you're going to have your 2 cards that are going to be your main actions, your main attack actions you're using on a regular basis, as well as your 2 specials that you'll be using once per quest. These are much more powerful effects, but you got to pick and choose when the right time to use them is. So you have your 2 main actions, your 2 specials, you have your passive ability, and then you have improvements. You see, you're going to start the game with an improvement. They have a suggested improvement for your first game, or you could just go ahead and randomly draw improvements. But you're going to start with some improvements, and at the beginning of each encounter, you have another improvement where you're going to look at your character's improvement deck, pick 3 cards, look at them, choose which one you think you want to add to your character, and add a new ability to the character. This is also where the challenges are going to come into play. Each of the encounters are going to have a challenge, which represent a way for you to earn coins. You see, if you accomplish a challenge, you get 2 coins. If you don't accomplish a challenge, you only move on with 1 coin. And coins can be spent to put them onto your powers over here, onto your improvements, in order to power them up even further. So you have your starting character, you have your attack cards, you have your improvements you're gaining, and then you also have the currency of accomplishing those challenges to power up your improvements to even more powerful levels as you play through the game. Health is going to be tracked on this side sideboard over here, you have your initiative order, which is going to be laid out each encounter. You'll put out an initiative order, ordering the characters that are playing, as well as the enemies in play, as well as before the first character, you'll have a targeting card that tells you what the characters are targeting, as well as possibly something that is usually a negative effect that can happen to the characters. That's the general idea of Tanares Expeditions over here. You're going through these little quests, which are meant to be roguelike scenarios where you're going to go through maybe 90, maybe in 120 minutes, I'd say probably in the 60 to 90 minute range, as you try to take on the various baddies, power up your characters along the way, face down the ultimate boss, and make your way through each quest in the game. That is the general overview of how you play this game, which brings us to my thoughts, my little mini, what did I call it? My rapid fire review over here. Am I keeping it? No, I'm not going to be keeping this game, although it's very, very important to distinguish where this game fits in for me, which we're going to get to, which I guess is the next section, why or why not. And the short version is, I like the quick pacing of Tanares Expeditions. I think it does a very good job as far as the pacing of the experience relative to, well, Tanares Adventures, its big brother. At the same time, as someone who has spent a lot of time with Tanares Adventures, I have spent a lot of time in Arena of the Contest, a lot of time in Tanares Adventures, I have learned to love those rules and the intricate systems at play. To me, this feels like an overall weaker experience that also has the additional downside of making it slightly harder to remember the rule set for one versus the other, since they're 90% identical as far as the combat interactions, but then there are small nuanced differences. Is a sidestep your entire move action, or is it 4 points of your move action? Small things like that will be meaningless to you if you haven't played Tanares Adventures, but it does mean that to me, Tanares Expeditions is solving a problem that I don't necessarily have. It's a smaller, more accessible version of the game that is going to be familiar to those who have played it, that's going to give you a roguelite experience. That, by the way, is the main compelling aspect to it, because the quicker experience where you have a single quest in which your characters are going to power up throughout the quest, and then you can go ahead and play another quest and arc up your characters through a whole different pattern, that is the main compelling reason for this game. For me, ultimately, I only have so much room for any type of game in my collection at any given point, and I have so much Tanares Adventures as it is that I don't think this does enough differently to stand out for me personally. As far as other similar games, the first thing is going to be, I'm going to be giving you other more, not boss battlers, other roguelite experiences over here. There's Grim Coven from Awakened Realms, which is going to have a similar arc, a longer playtime, but a similar arc as far as characters that will build up and grow throughout the course of taking down various hordes until they eventually take down and defeat the boss. And then more importantly and more practically, I would recommend Odalin Dungeons of Doom. Now it's important to note, neither of those two recommendations are currently available for you to play at the time of me filming this video. They are likely available for you to late back if you want to get either of those, but Odalin Dungeons of Doom, from the creators of this, from Dagori Games, to me kind of accomplished being similar and yet different to Tanares in a way that I felt was more different, while giving me that roguelite experience that kind of, I think, is the scratching the itch that Tanares Expeditions brings to the table. So the main compelling thing about Tanares Expeditions is that roguelike, faster gameplay, and I think Odalin did it for me while being much more different. This is too similar, shows too much DNA with Tanares Adventures for me personally. So Grim Coven and Odalin Dungeons of Doom are going to be similar games that I'd recommend in this genre. As far as a counter opinion, why it might be right for you, frankly, it's a good game. It is a good game. I have the downside, or upside, depending how you look at it, of having played a lot of Tanares Adventures, and I'll be continuing to play through more Tanares Adventures. Stay tuned for future playthroughs on the channel. It's still an ongoing series. I just took a break from it, and Tanares Adventures to me gives me the same tactical decision gameplay that Tanares Expeditions does. I'm giving you the reasons as to why let's go back to this. Why should you get this game? The counter opinion. So the short version is I think Tanares Adventures is an excellent game. This is built on that same DNA while being easier to table, more accessible, a cheaper price point, faster game time. Those are all good reasons to possibly get this if you've passed on Tanares Adventures. The core bones of this are a fast-paced, easy is not the right word, a fast-paced, accessible, roguelite dungeon crawling experience that aims to give you the leveling up and arc of your character growth across 90 minutes as opposed to across who knows how many campaigns. And to that end, it does a good job overall. As far as my rating and final thoughts, this is where I struggle with this on this one, because usually when I rate a game, I try to rate a game in a vacuum. Like, what is this game on its own, not how do I feel about this game compared to other games. It's very hard for me to remove that bias in this case because of how similar it is to Tanares Adventures. So for me, my rating on this, I'm coming in at a 3.5 out of 5, although I'm very uncertain whether that's a fair rating. This might well be a 4 out of 5. It's hard for me to say because it is so similar to Tanares Adventures in many other aspects. Again, there are differences, there are reasons to have both, but for me, I'm not going to. That when I look at the experience I'm having here and then comparing it to how much more depth there is to the Tanares Adventures experience, this one feels a little lacking for me personally. But again, that's where the rating might be a bit unfair, because I might be dinging it half a point there in relation to another game where I can't fully separate out my experience from it. So it's a 3.5 out of 5. I did hesitate as to whether it's a 4. Again, there's that muddiness of the water over there, so take that as you will. And that is basically your rapid fire roundup review, which I'm almost certain is not 10 minutes or less. But until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.